Harris as the Democratic Party's presumptive nominee. Biden has addressed the nation for the first time on Thursday since quitting the presidential race. He said he's passing the torch to a new generation to unite the country. Biden has called upon voters to defend the country's democracy. He has also asserted that the decision to withdraw from the fight for president's post was in defense of the American democracy. However, he did not directly name Donald Trump, whom he has been referring to as a threat to democracy. Now remember, the decision to bow out came after a crisis in his electoral prospects after his abysmal debate against Donald Trump nearly a month ago, where a clueless Biden spoke haltingly and failed to rebut the Republican nominee's attacks. Listen in.
It's not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures.
President Joe Biden addressing his decision to step away from the 2024 presidential race.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
And priorities for the final months of his term.
I'll keep defending our personal freedoms and our civil rights, from the right to vote to the right to choose.
Biden's Oval Office speech timed to give the president's voice an opportunity to recover from COVID-19 and deliver the address with vigor, a senior advisor said. Regarding Biden's decision to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place at the top of the ticket, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said the president has no regrets.
This is, again, a decision that this president made, and I think he is proud to have made that decision.
Harris has had a quick start to her presidential bid.
There's so much at stake in this moment. There's so much at stake.
And former President Donald Trump in North Carolina for his first rally since Biden's announcement wasted no time pivoting his attacks.
The vote for Kamala is a vote for 4 more years of dishonesty, incompetence.
But back at the White House, President Biden used one of the most important speeches of his long political career to stress the importance of November's election, even as he leaves the ballot.
History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands.
And so Kamala Harris has emerged from Joe Biden's shadow and emerged really tall in just about a week's time. But what will it really take for Kamala Harris to make it to the White House? And what are the Democrat hurdles at the moment? Moreover, there is a change of strategy for the GOP. What is it like? I find out in a discussion with former Republican Bob McKeown and former Democrat congressional candidate from Florida, Jessica Ehrlich. Let's listen in. Bob and Jessica, thank you so much for joining in on World 360. Bob, if I could begin with you, what was your assessment of President Biden's speech at the Oval Office?
Well, it's a whole series of emotions. A person who dedicated his life of service to his country, you feel a little sad at his passing, but it certainly is appropriate, and he struggled at certain parts just to get it out. And so it's what you feel when you like someone, but you know that it's time to move on. All of those things are there. I think he did the right thing.
Jessica, many have talked about how in his address at the Oval, he's made this about a fight for democracy. What is your assessment when he emphasized on how he will not let anything come in the way of singular democracy?
I think that is the main messaging that we've seen throughout his campaign for re-election. And now going forward, we will see when what will likely be Kamala Harris's run for president as the Democratic candidate. There was a lot of emphasis not only on his policies, but on what that vision of democracy looks like. Several mentions of how we don't have dictators, we don't have kings or monarchs, referencing previous great presidents in the United States, and also sort of drawing a little bit of that contrast with his administration and the administration that came before him that was former President Trump. So I think those are just sort of things that we're going to hear repeatedly, that we have heard repeatedly, and that are fears with a lot of Americans.
Right. Bob, the latest surveys are showing a virtual tie after Joe Biden dropped out, and that is the tie between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. In fact, Harris is leading former President Trump by 2 points in one of the first new polls. taken after Joe Biden dropped out of the race. She trails by 2 in another one and 1 point in a third one. So it's, when you, sort of take an average, it is a virtual tie. What do you attribute this to?
Well, quite frankly, I see it as that liberal leftist policies don't work. And when they take over a school district, the school system goes down. Take over a city, it goes sour. Same way with state governments. And so they understand that their policies are so rejected by the people that the best way to win in 2020 was to keep Joe Biden in a basement. Make sure that he didn't speak, because when he spoke, people would be very offended. And so now that he's been in office for 4 years, he now has the lowest standing of any president in history. And so now immediately you have his vice president, and they're going to talk about a lot of things. But as soon as they begin to look at her policies and understand what she's done on the border, as the borders are, what she wants to do about energy independence, she's far more radical than even Joe Biden was. As those things are going to, so this is her honeymoon. This is as good as it gets. Everybody is happy and knows who you are, but you haven't taken any responsibility for anything. So I think we're going to see, everybody knows Donald Trump. They know what he stands for and where he is.
Jessica, Harris honeymoon, that's the term that's being referred to, as you heard right now. I bet you beg to differ. What do you think that this is a short-term bump that the Democrats are experiencing in the polls? And why so? Whatever, if it is not a short-term bump, why do you think so?
Well, what we're seeing now is actually a return to the numbers we saw in polling prior to the first debate, right? The presidential debate that was so disastrous for Joe Biden. And so now we're back to where we have been, really for the last year, where we're looking at an even split amongst voters. I think there is a point where, yes, people who are supporting Donald Trump and that are hardcore Republicans are motivated. They had an amazing Republican convention, and they came out of that very unified and very energized. However, the same can be said for Kamala Harris. I mean, she set a record in terms of 24-hour and first few days of the support that she got in terms of fundraising. She now has amassed an amazing war chest, and many of those donations were very small dollar donations made by individuals around the country. There's also been a huge surge in people who have signed up and volunteered to canvass and work and get out the vote for her campaign. That is a very energized base. We're going to see that, and I think it changes the map that, votes are important and polls are important per se, but we've seen over the last 2 cycles, 8, 10, even 12 years, where polling has become more and more inaccurate. People are less likely to respond to them or to respond to them honestly. What is important is the motivation of voters, reaching independent voters, those who are not listed as one party or the other, making sure that you get out your base to vote. And I think that's what both campaigns are focused on, and then it'll come down to the electoral map.
But Bob, let's talk about the attacks that have been coming in from Donald Trump and the majority of Republicans. They're, of course, attacking Kamala for her immigration policies particularly. But when it comes to her being the spokesperson for, abortion rights, we've seen how Donald Trump, in fact, gave it a complete miss in his first speech, which he delivered at the RNC post the assassination attempt. Is that now going to work against Donald Trump? Because we've seen how Kamala is now, shaping up her political rhetoric. She's talking about how she will stand up for, she's in fact been somebody who's prosecuted felons, convicted felons like Donald Trump, how she's also standing up for abortion rights. She's also talked about how she will be working towards building a better middle class.
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And indeed, what they do, they will not want to talk about policy, because when you take their policies on interest rates or on, you just name any of it, they're very unpopular. So they go to the attack, and the attack standard will be always abortion. They look at their 2 key constituents. They need to get single and suburban women, and then they need to get the inner city Black support. And so that you will constantly, especially as it gets very close to the election, you'll hear the constant refrain, of abortion, 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 and racism, 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 racism. They won't talk about the fact that a same house that was in 2020, exactly the same home, in order to purchase it, and the house payments are twice what they were just 4 years ago. That's one example. The list goes on and on. A family of four now has to spend $22,000 more per year just to stay at the same levels that they were.
Jessica, do you think it's for Kamala Harris, it's becoming about policy versus credentials? Because if she were to come to power, she'll be the first female U.S. president, not to forget, of South Asian brown descent.
Yes, and I think that is a good point to be made, that women voters are going to be key in this election. We've seen that over and over in the last several presidential cycles, the importance of getting women out to vote and getting them motivated. It's part of what was able to sort of take down Donald Trump after his first presidency. So, he lost all of those suburban women voters, particularly educated women voters. And we've already seen a tremendous amount of the volunteers, and the enthusiasm has been among Black women and Asian women in the United States. And we're going to see that continued, as well as with women in general.
Bob, let's quickly talk about the VP pick now. How much rests upon the choice of the vice presidential candidate? Because bets are being placed on the Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, to North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, who is, in your view, going to be a likely pick. But having said that, how will this now be weighed against J.D. Vance?
Well, let's quickly just say a word about Indian Americans. And as you know, she was elected as the first Indian American in the Senate. That's what all the headlines were. Silicon Valley is dominated by Indian Americans. The average income of the Indian American family immigrant is twice what the average American. And so the Republican Party with Nikki Haley and Ramaswamy, the Indian Americans are playing a very major part in the leadership. And they usually don't make the decisions on the vice president. But I personally, of course, being from Ohio, our senator and friend and neighbor in my case, JD is an excellent choice for the next generation that understands. Here's the most important thing. He understands what intellectuals have not understood for 40 years. He understands what causes poverty.
Bob, I'd like to end with your thoughts on the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's made that roaring address to the U.S. Congress, in which he's talked about ending the war and how he's very sure that Israel is going to win that war. Having said that, he's arrived at a very changed political landscape in the United States, with Biden dropping out of the race, nominating Kamala Harris. Now, how much rests upon the Democrats to ensure that the war in Gaza ends, to ensure that they have a better outlook as far as their take on foreign policy is concerned?
In answer to your question about the visit this week, when America is weak, there is aggression, whether it be in Ukraine, whether it be in Taiwan, with the South China Sea, or whether it be in the Middle East. And we have to get to this election as rapidly as possible. You saw that many of the Democrats would not stand or clap when the Prime Minister was speaking to Congress this week, and he is warmly received and went to President Trump's home before he went back to Israel. I think that there is a dichotomy that the Democrat Party, that was always such a friend to Israel, in the last 18 months to 3 years has really turned its back, in my judgment. That's an opinion. And I think that it's very unfortunate for the world, but I think it's going to be corrected next year.
All right. Jessica, quick thoughts on what do you think about that need for closure on conflicts as far as the United States is concerned at the moment?
I mean, the world is in a very perilous position right now. And I think that is recognized, as Bob mentioned, in multiple theaters around the world. It's very important that, as a country and as a leader in this world, that we show strength and stability, and that we, show unity, which is something that I think has been actually talked about out of both
True, but how much
campaigns.
of that will impact the Democrat performance now in the presidential race?
American voters really come out to vote and get most motivated about pocketbook issues and about those sorts of things that affect their families directly. Because really, when you get into the nitty gritty of foreign affairs, it's not exactly something that people are that engaged in. And there are a lot of sort of rabble rousers that happen on both sides. I mean, the Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a very moving speech. There was some very disgraceful protests and things that were happening in the Capitol that I think are very disturbing to the majority of Americans. And, what happens going forward will be very interesting. But I think what really motivates Americans, yes, they think about foreign affairs and our place in the world and the strength and importance of America. But when they're casting their ballots, we see it over and over again. They're concerned really about what is our economy like? Do they have jobs? Can they feed their children? Can they buy a house? What does that look like? Do they have healthcare? Do they have access to medicine? And do we have secure borders and things like that? That is really what drives people when they're actually casting their ballots.
All right. I'm sure they're also aware that these global wars are also impacting the national economy. But having said that, I'm afraid I'm running short of time and I'll have to leave it at that. Many thanks to you, Jessica and Bob, for sharing your very precious time and insights.